In 1970, a mother purchased an antique Raggedy Ann doll from a hobby store. The doll was a present for her daughter Donna on her birthday. Donna, at the time, was a college student preparing to graduate with her nursing degree, and lived in a small apartment with her roommate Angie, who was also a nurse. Pleased with the doll, Donna placed it on her bed as a decoration and didn't give it a second thought until a few days later. Both Donna and Angie noticed something strange and creepy about the doll. At first, the movements were subtle, almost unnoticeable, like a slight change in position, but over time, the movements became more pronounced. Donna and Angie would come home to find the doll in a completely different room from where they had left it. Sometimes, the doll would be found sitting cross-legged on the couch with its arms folded. Other times, it was found standing upright, leaning against a chair in the dining room. Several times, Donna placed the doll on the couch before leaving for work, only to return and find the doll back in her bedroom with the door closed. About a month into their experience, Donna and Angie began finding penciled messages on parchment paper reading "Help us" and "Help Lou." The handwriting resembled that of a small child. What made the messages particularly creepy was not the wording, but the fact that Donna had never kept parchment paper in the house. Where had it come from? One night, Donna came home to find the doll had moved again, this time on her bed. While this was typical of the doll's behavior by now, something about this time felt different. A sense of dread came over her as she inspected the doll and saw what looked like blood drops on its hands and chest. A liquid red substance had mysteriously appeared on the doll. Scared and desperate, Donna and Angie decided it was time to seek expert advice. Not knowing where to turn, they contacted a medium, and a seance was held. During the seance, Donna and Angie were introduced to the spirit of Annabelle Higgins. The medium told them that Annabelle was a young girl who had lived on the property before the apartment complex was built. She had died at the age of 7, and her body had been found in the field where the apartments now stood. Annabelle's spirit said she felt comfortable with Donna and Angie and wanted to stay with them. Moved by her story, Donna gave Annabelle permission to inhabit the doll and stay with them. However, they soon discovered that Annabelle was not what she seemed. Lou, a friend of Donna and Angie, had been there since the doll arrived. From the beginning, Lou disliked the doll and warned Donna that it was evil and that she should get rid of it. Donna, however, felt attached to the doll and dismissed Lou's warnings, a decision that would prove to be a terrible mistake. One night, Lou awoke from a deep sleep in a panic. He had been having recurring nightmares, but this time felt different. It was as if he were awake, but he couldn't move. Looking around the room, he saw nothing out of the ordinary, until he glanced down at his feet. There, to his horror, was the doll. Annabelle began to slowly glide up his leg onto his chest and then stopped. Within seconds, the doll was strangling him. Paralyzed and gasping for breath, Lou blacked out. When he woke the next morning, he was certain it wasn't a dream. Lou was determined to rid himself of the doll and the spirit that possessed it. But before he could, Lou had one more terrifying encounter with Annabelle. While preparing for a road trip, Lou and Angie were reading over maps in the apartment when they heard rustling sounds coming from Donna's room. Fearing an intruder, Lou quietly approached the bedroom. When the noises stopped, he entered the room and turned on the light. The room was empty, except for Annabelle, who had been tossed onto the floor in the corner. As Lou searched the room, he suddenly felt like someone was behind him. Spinning around, he found no one there, but then, without warning, he doubled over in pain, clutching his chest. Blood stained his shirt, and when he opened it, he saw 7 distinct claw marks, 3 vertically and 4 horizontally. The marks were hot to the touch, like burns. Strangely, they healed almost immediately and were completely gone within 2 days. Donna finally realized that the spirit inhabiting the doll was not that of a young girl, but something inhuman and demonic. After Lou's experience, Donna sought help from an Episcopal priest named Father Hagen. Father Hagen, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, contacted Father Cook, who in turn reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned paranormal investigators. The Warrens quickly determined that the doll was not possessed, but manipulated by an inhuman spirit. They explained that spirits don't possess objects like dolls. They possess people. However, an inhuman spirit can attach itself to a place or object. In this case, the spirit had manipulated the doll in order to attract attention and eventually possess a human host. The spirit's goal was to move from the infestation stage, where it gained recognition, to full possession. The Warrens recommended an exorcism blessing to cleanse the apartment. Father Cook performed the rite, a lengthy prayer designed to fill the home with positive energy rather than directly expel the entity. At Donna's request, and as a precaution, the Warrens took the doll with them when they left. On the way home, Ed placed the doll in the back seat of the car, avoiding the interstate in case the spirit still lingered. His suspicions proved correct when the car began to swerve uncontrollably, stalling at every dangerous curve. At one point, the brakes and steering failed completely, and the car nearly collided. Ed, realizing the danger, reached into his bag, took out a vial of holy water, and doused the doll while making the sign of the cross. The disturbances stopped immediately, and the Warrens made it home safely. After the Warrens arrived home, Ed placed the doll in a chair next to his desk. In the beginning, the doll levitated several times before eventually becoming motionless. However, over the following weeks, it began to mysteriously appear in different rooms of the house. When the Warrens were away, even after locking the doll in the outer office building, they would often return to find it seated comfortably upstairs in Ed's easy chair. The doll also displayed a strong dislike for clergymen who entered the house. On one occasion, Father Jason Bradford, a Catholic exorcist, visited the home. Upon seeing the doll seated in the chair, he picked it up and said, "You're just a rag doll, Annabelle. You can't hurt anyone," and tossed the doll back in the chair. Ed quickly responded, "That's one thing you better not say." When Father Jason left, Lorraine pleaded with him to drive carefully and to call her when he arrived home. She had a sense of foreboding about the priest's fate. A few hours later, Father Jason called Lorraine, explaining that his brakes had failed as he approached a busy intersection, resulting in a near-fatal accident that destroyed his vehicle. This was just one of the many strange events connected to the doll over the years. The Warrens eventually had a special case built for Annabelle, which was placed in their occult museum, where she remains to this day. Since the case was built, Annabelle has not been seen moving, though she is believed to have been responsible for the death of a young man who visited the museum with his girlfriend on a motorcycle. After hearing Ed's account of the doll, the young man defiantly approached the case and banged on it, demanding to be scratched if the doll could do such things. Ed sternly warned him, saying, "Son, you need to leave," and escorted him out of the building. On the way home, the young man and his girlfriend were laughing and mocking the doll when he lost control of his motorcycle and crashed into a tree. The young man was killed instantly, while his girlfriend survived but was hospitalized for over a year. When asked about the incident, the young woman explained that they had been laughing about the doll when they lost control of the bike. Ed warns people, "You do not challenge evil. No man is more powerful than Satan." My mom lived in a cute little duplex in the next town over, but one day she abruptly decided to move in with my brother in Idaho. She still had 3 months left on her lease, but she didn't care. She started moving her things bit by bit, hauling everything between California and Idaho in her pickup truck. On her first trip, the engine blew a head gasket, so she called me and asked if I could pack up the rest of her house and put it in storage. I agreed, having been to her place many times before. However, I had never been there alone at night. This was an old house, and it didn't have any light fixtures except in the kitchen and bathroom. So as the sun went down, I had to rely on lamps to light most of the rooms, which left plenty of shadows creeping around. As time passed, I began to feel uneasy, like I wasn't alone. It's hard to describe, but I felt another presence in the house. Then I started seeing something, a dark, featureless figure in the corner of my eye. Each time I turned to look at it, it would vanish, only for me to catch glimpses of it again. Sometimes I'd see it peeking around a corner or from behind a doorway, and then it would move just out of sight. That was enough for me. I packed up what I could and got out of there. I never went back at night after that. Years later, I told my mom about the experience, and she said, "That's why I moved." Back in the 1990s, I lived on Beach Avenue in Oldham, Lancashire, in the UK. When I moved into the house with my wife and 4 younger daughters, things seemed to be working out quite well for us. But after a while, strange things started to happen every morning. The house alarm would go off at 5 a.m., and it was always the same sensor in the kitchen that was tripped. Sometimes I'd put the TV on upstairs for the children, but when they went up to watch, the TV had been switched off. One time, when we were playing with the children outside, I saw the figure of a man for just a second at the window. I said to my daughter, "I thought I told you to lock the back door and windows before we went outside." I rushed in, thinking it was an intruder, but there was no one inside. All the doors and windows were locked, so no one could have gotten in or out. A few weeks later, we got a little Yorkshire Terrier called Richie, and he would come upstairs at night and sleep on the bottom of the bed. One night, after we had finished watching TV, we decided to go to bed. I opened the door to the stairs and saw my wife and children go up to bed while I turned everything off and locked up. I went to the foot of the stairs and called Richie, but he didn't move. He stayed under the blanket. I called him again, but he just wouldn't move. So I went over to pick him up, and he started to growl at me. As I put my hand closer to him, he snapped at me. I made a grab for him and managed to get him to the stairs, but when I put him down, he crouched down on the floor and wouldn't go upstairs. So I threw his blanket onto the living room floor, and he ran to it and stayed there all night. Then one day, my brother came to stay for the Christmas holiday. We were talking and having a good time. My brother excused himself to go to the bathroom, and a few minutes later, he came down and took me aside and said, "I have just come out of the bathroom and saw a man in your bedroom looking out the window." I asked him, what did he look like? And my brother said he could only see the back of the man, but the man was bald. He wore a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, trousers, and braces. I asked him not to mention it to my wife as I didn't want her to be scared, especially since I sometimes had to work at night. A few weeks passed without anything happening, and then our niece came to visit. Again, she went upstairs, but before she reached the top, she came running down screaming. At first, she was too upset to speak, but when she had calmed down, she said that she had seen a man standing at the top of the stairs. Once again, he was wearing a shirt with rolled up sleeves and trousers with braces. I decided to ask my neighbors about who had lived in the house before us, and one neighbor told us that a man had lived there and worked for the local council, driving a dustbin van. She said that he would get up at the same time every day to make his breakfast before going to work, which was 5 a.m. When I asked her to describe him, she told us he wore a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, trousers, and braces most of the time, and he loved tending to his garden. He would often chat with anyone who came by, as he was a very easygoing man who would help anyone out if he could. She told us that one day he went out to work, and when dinner time came, she knew something was wrong, as the man would come home for dinner at the same time every day. But on this occasion, he didn't come home. It was only later that she found out that he had died while at work. I couldn't believe it, but it was true. I was so dumbfounded that the man had shown himself to members of my family, but I came to the conclusion that he meant no harm to me or my family. It didn't make it any easier sharing our home with him, but after all, it was his home first. When I was 15 and wanted to make some extra money, I started babysitting. One evening, I got a call from a married couple asking me if I could babysit their child. They had a 5-year-old boy named Tito. I agreed and arrived at their house at the appointed time, just as the parents were getting ready to leave. They told me that their son sometimes had imaginary friends. At night, he would talk to them. "Don't let this freak you out," the father chuckled. After they were gone, I made dinner for Tito, and we played some board games. Then I gave him a bath and got him ready for bed. I tucked the little boy in, wished him good night, and went downstairs to do some homework. But an hour later, I heard Tito's voice. I thought he might be calling me, so I went up to his room to check on him. When I opened his bedroom door, he was sitting upright in bed, talking to the closet. I walked in hesitantly, looking at Tito. I heard him mumbling things, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. "Tito, who are you talking to?" I asked. "The man with the red face," he said. A chill ran down my spine. "Is he in your closet?" I asked. "Yes," said the little boy. "He makes faces at me sometimes." "What does he look like?" I asked, my voice trembling. He made a face like someone choking and gasping for air. I slammed the closet door shut. Then Tito looked up and started to flip out, screaming his head off. "Go away!" he cried. "Get out!" He was looking straight at me. "Tito, stop shouting!" I said, trying to calm him down. "Who are you talking to? Who are you telling to go away?" "The woman," he replied. "What woman?" I asked. "The woman who always comes," Tito moaned. "She doesn't like the man with the red face." "Does she have a red face too?" I asked. "No," the little boy replied, and his eyes grew wide. "She doesn't have a face." "Where is this woman?" I asked. Then he said the words that will haunt me in my dreams forever. "She's crawling on the ceiling, like a spider." With that, Tito laid down, and after a few moments he was fast asleep. I was shaking with fear. That night, when Tito's parents came home, I was still trembling. They asked if everything was okay, and I lied, telling them everything was fine. The husband offered to drive me home. When I got home that night, it was very late, and I was exhausted, but I was glad to get away from that house. The next day, I decided to look into the history of the house, and quickly found something that shocked me. Apparently, the house had once belonged to a family of 4. The father found out that his wife was cheating on him, and when he confronted her about it, she told him she wanted a divorce. The man flew into a rage and went on a murderous rampage, skinning his wife alive and beating his 2 children to death. When he came to his senses and realized what he had done, he hung himself in the upstairs closet. The closet, the red face, red with blood, gasping for air. The woman with no face, it was all too familiar. I refused to babysit for them again. A few months later, the family moved away, and the house is now abandoned. Several years ago, I came across an old Ouija board that dated back to 1919. I remember how fascinated I was with an experience I had when I was about 10, so I thought that this board game would be fun to fool around with again. I considered the experiment despite the already strange experiences my son had at our house. My son, when he was very young, told me about looking out his bedroom window and seeing 3 glowing figures coming from the field toward his window one night. He also stated that they even entered his room and stood at the foot of his bed. He covered his head with the blankets, thinking that they would go away, and when he uncovered his head, they were still there. Then they vanished. At the time, I attributed this to a bad dream. There was an old, beautiful house on my property, built in 1926. The builder even signed and dated his name in the rafters in the attic. I thought it was cool that he took so much pride in his work, like an artist, to do such a thing. It was here that my son, 2 of my friends, and I decided to try the Ouija board. My son wanted to know if what he saw outside his bedroom window that night was real or not. Perhaps the Ouija would know. We got an answer, and a lot more. I wanted my 2 friends to work the board, since they didn't know anything about my son's experience. In fact, they didn't even know the name of the road I lived on, or much of anything else about that neck of the woods. I, who wasn't really taking any of this very seriously, began by asking if there were any ghosts who wanted to speak to us. The board replied by pointing to yes. "Who are you?" I asked. "Anna Mills." My friends kept their fingers on the planchette. "Why are you here?" I asked, and the planchette began to move quickly. "I died here on the Munger Shaw Road." I was aware that my friends did not know the name of the road I lived on, so now my curiosity was piqued. "How?" I inquired. "Truck. How?" I pressed. "Run over when?" In 1936, at this point, I was beginning to have a little fun with the game, but still did not take it seriously at all. After all, I reasoned, this thing was just a game. So if this is all true, I challenged the spirit jokingly, "Where is your body, so that I can bring you some flowers?" The answer sent chills down my spine. "You are there." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Scattered." I assumed the word was misspelled by the young spirit. "My ashes are scattered, where your trailer house is." The spirit Anna gave my friends and me a lot of information that night. She told us she was with two uncles who were elusive but protecting her. She was visiting them on the property when her death occurred. Strange things have happened here, both before and after this contact. When I first put the trailer house where it is, now abandoned because I'm living in the old house, my ex-wife and I heard a child's voice crying. I can say that without a doubt. My ex also told me she saw a small girl one night fleeing out the door. I even caught a glimpse of her one night when I woke up to use the bathroom, just out of the corner of my eye. At the time, I figured I was just half asleep. I tried another Ouija experiment, this time with two different people at the board, but we ended up having the same conversation with Anna Mills. I can't find any records of her existing anywhere. But out here in the sticks, especially back in the 1930s, records might not have been that important. Heck, I know a guy who has two people buried in his front yard from back then. That's just how they get things. I asked Anna who her uncles were, but she was pretty elusive about that. Even after everything that happened, I still wasn't completely sold on the whole thing. Until about a year later. I went for a walk, which I do pretty often. I was crossing the field on a winter moonlit night. On my way back, I clearly saw two people sneaking around the trailer. Thinking someone was trying to break in, I shouted, "What do you want?" and got ready to confront the intruders. I swear I was within 15 feet of this guy, wearing a plaid shirt and bib overalls, when he suddenly turned and went right through the wall of the trailer house, right below my son's old bedroom. I could see every detail of his face and the texture of his clothes. He looked just like a real person under that full moonlight. I stopped dead in my tracks. But surprisingly, I wasn't scared out of my wits, which is what you'd expect. Instead, this comforting feeling washed over me. About a month ago, I was visiting my sister and her family at their house miles away. Her daughter had an old message board that her dad found years ago in the attic of an old school he used to work at. The planchette was missing, so I decided to make a really nice wooden one for them in his wood shop. With her and her boyfriend at the board, I asked, "Anna, are you here?" The board replied, "Hi, Rick. This really freaked everyone out. Tell us the story you told me last time we spoke." And just like that, the same story came out again. I haven't revealed any of the things Anna said before, but there it was, just the same. She said I did see her once, and that she and her uncles visited my son. Once the planchette started moving, she just kept going on and on. I asked her if she liked what I did with the old house. It still looks the same as it did back in the 1930s, just with electricity and plumbing added. She said she felt at home. I asked if she ever enters the house, and she said, no bad memories. My son and I continued to see strange things on the property. Lately, at night, both my son and I have seen someone dart past the kitchen window. Even our dog alerts us like someone is here, but there isn't anyone. The last time I used the board, Anna said she wanted to meet me along the edge of the field at 1 o'clock in the morning, but I never bothered to go. We have a house in Shiraz, Iran, and like many homes there, we had a caretaker, an Afghani family who lived with us. On August 2nd, I got terrible news while I was in Canada. The youngest son of the family, just 4 years old, had a tragic accident and didn't survive. The news left us devastated. Even though I wasn't close to him, I knew the kid. I had spent time with him just this past March. I couldn't comprehend how he fell into the water reservoir. I felt compelled to check our security cameras to understand what had happened. I wish I hadn't, because now the images are burned into my mind. But someone had to do it to make sure the police wouldn't blame his father. His dad was watering the yard that day, using a hose lowered into a newly built water reservoir with a 1 meter by 1 meter hatch. On that awful day, the hatch was left uncovered while he watered a different part of the yard. What I saw on the footage was haunting. The boy came riding his tricycle, saw the open hatch, got off his trike, looked down into it, then walked away. He did what any kid would have done. He grabbed rocks and sticks, threw them down the hole, and then got back on his tricycle. He rode past the hatch, but then stopped, distracted by something. He looked towards the neighbor's house, which we share a fence with. a very open fence since that house used to belong to my uncle. I later learned that the neighbor was outside at the time and was speaking to the boy, but had turned away just seconds before the accident. The boy seemed distracted for a moment, then pedaled backward, stopped, and moved forward again. Something caught his attention once more, and then, inexplicably, he backpedaled again, and I watched him fall in. What's unsettling is that back in March, they used to tease him about his imaginary boogeyman. One day, I asked him to describe it, and I sketched what he told me. What he described was something straight out of a nightmare, demonic, with 3 horns and small beady eyes. That image has stuck with me. I've watched that footage repeatedly, trying to make sense of it. The eerie wind blowing the leaves, only to suddenly stop, it all feels surreal. I can't shake the feeling that something more than distraction caused him to backpedal instead of moving forward the second time. He had a clear path over the bridge that crossed the dry stream, yet he hesitated. That part of the house has always made me uneasy. It's close to the wall where we have a wooden shed, and even as a kid, that spot always gave me the creeps. I used to feel like something was watching me, and every time I went near it, my senses would go on high alert. I never believed in any of this stuff until I saw it with my own eyes. It was the fall of 1998 when some friends and I decided to try out a Ouija board. I was pretty skeptical, but didn't see any harm in it, so I went along with it. We didn't have a proper store-bought board, and nobody felt like driving miles to find one, so we decided to make our own. We grabbed a piece of cardboard, wrote the alphabet, yes, no, and even added the sun and moon in the corners. For the planchette, we cut out a triangular piece of cardboard. It didn't move as smoothly as a real one, so we had to push it a bit. Let me set the scene. We were in Huntsville, Texas, and earlier that day, Martin Gurewal, a prisoner who had escaped death row for murder, had been found dead in the river, not far from my friend's house. The house itself was old and run down, and we gathered in a middle room that was being used as a bedroom. There were about 10 of us, and we all sat around the board. The only light in the room was coming from a big cake candle. A couple of my friends suggested, "Let's talk to Gurewal," and we all agreed. Tanner and Melissa were the only ones who would touch the pointer. Tanner had never done anything like this before, but Melissa said she'd seen it done. They placed their hands above the pointer, and Tanner asked, "Are there any spirits out there tonight?" The crazy thing was, the planchette moved. This shocked everyone in the room because neither of them had actually touched it yet. Their fingers were just hovering a couple of inches above it. As soon as it moved, slowly but surely, the whole room fell silent. Even the skeptics, including me, couldn't say anything. The planchette moved to yes. Tanner asked, "What is your name?" The board responded, "Used to be Gurewal." Now I was still skeptical. "That's not how you spell Guruli," I said. "I thought it was spelled Guruli or something." But Chad jumped in, saying he'd seen it in the newspapers and confirmed it was spelled Gurule. That's when things started getting weird. Tommy, who was sitting next to me, nudged me and whispered, "Did you see that?" Before I could answer, Chad said, "I saw it too." They said the left side of the pointer had lifted off the board and was dragging along on the right. I hadn't noticed that, but what happened next was impossible to ignore. Tanner and Melissa's fingers were over the T, and suddenly, the pointer zipped over to the A on the other side of the board, but their fingers were still hovering over the T. After seeing that, they pulled their hands away. The whole time I felt this claustrophobic pressure in my chest, like something was squeezing me. Then we asked a question that really hit home. Shay, who was sitting on the bed about 4 feet from the board, mentioned that Gurule had gone to high school in the Corpus Christi area, but he didn't know exactly where. Shay had been to a lot of schools there as a high school officer, but the rest of us didn't know anything about Corpus Christi. Tanner asked Gurul's spirit where he had gone to high school. The pointer moved to R, then A. Shay's eyes widened and he moved closer to the board, whispering, "No way." Then it slid to Y. "The Ray Texans," Shay said. "That's a school in Corpus Christi." Everyone was shocked. At that point, Tanner bolted into the kitchen and flipped on the light. He had goosebumps and his eyes were watery. "I'm not going back in there, Tommy," he said. There was something around me. "Since the house belonged to Tommy," he said, "well, go ask it to leave then. If something's in here, I want it gone." Tanner hesitated, but eventually went back and asked the entity to leave. The pointer slid to no. He asked again. No. A third time. No. Then the pointer slid to the middle of the board and stopped completely. It wouldn't move again after that. We all went to the back porch and burned the cardboard board while some of us lit up cigarettes, trying to calm down. When we finally went back inside, the last person to close the door saw something strange. The pots fell off the counter, and the pictures on the fridge, held by magnets, dropped to the floor. Nobody said a word. Tommy and Shay decided to sleep in the other room that night, and even took down the deer heads from the wall because they didn't want the dead animals talking to them in the middle of the night. I get how the mind can play tricks on you, make you see things that aren't really there. But that night? There's no explanation. None of us in that room knew where Guru went to school, and the only one who had any idea was sitting far from the board. It couldn't have just randomly spelled those letters, I thought. So I got on the internet, and by the end of that semester, I found out that Guru did indeed attend Ray High School. That was the moment it all clicked for me. I saw the devil when I was a kid. The lights went out in my apartment, and I went across the hall to get a flashlight and went home. I was maybe 7. I pointed the flashlight at the wall and saw it there. I stood frozen until I noticed it move and walk away. Its knees were bent backward. It had long nails that looked like actual screws, horns, and a hunched back. I ran and cut my leg on some suitcases my mom had put by the door to let the light in. Ever since then, I've believed in Jesus. I didn't know it was the devil, but years later I made the connection. What's weird is what came after. I felt cursed. I'm not saying this happened all at once or right after, but a lot of strange things happened. I got off the train one night when I was 15, and a guy with a demonic smile jumped in front of me and wouldn't let me leave. He had a huge grin, blocked my path, and only ran away when the next train came. Then, when I started driving at 19, I stopped at a red light, and a smiling man wouldn't let my car through. It happened twice. And just like before, he ran away. I live in San Francisco, and many years ago, some friends of mine bought this stunning old Victorian house that really needed a lot of love and attention. Our friend group banded together, showing up on weekends to help out whenever we could. One day, while we were working on the place, we stumbled upon a closet that had been painted shut. After some effort, we finally pried it open, only to find it stuffed with a bunch of useless junk. But tucked away in there was an old mirror wrapped in newspaper. The paper dated back to the 1970s, but an art historian buddy of ours said the mirror was probably from the 1920s. It was a gorgeous piece, oval-shaped with ivy carved into the frame. Fast forward to when the house was finally finished. We all got together for a celebratory dinner and a grand tour. They had hung that mirror in their bedroom, right across from the door. As soon as I walked in, I caught my reflection, but there was a woman standing behind me. I whipped around, startled, but there was nobody there. My friends exchanged glances, then looked back at me and said, "You saw her, didn't you?" Apparently, this woman in the mirror was a regular visitor. They had tried hanging it in their hallway before, but she never showed up there. Once they moved it to the bedroom, though, that's when things got weird. They told me she's not always there, and not everyone who's come to check out the house has spotted her. Oh, and there was their dog, who absolutely refused to walk under the mirror. She would stand in the middle of the room, but wouldn't even think about going near that spot. I was at the Brookdale Lodge in the hills of Santa Cruz years ago and spent the night there while traveling on my motorcycle. I was standing outside, having a cup of coffee and a smoke, when I noticed the stained glass was in really bad shape. Inside, behind the stained glass, there was a restaurant with a creek running through the dining area. On the other side of the glass, I saw a young girl with black hair smiling at me. I thought it was odd, but waved to her, and she waved back. Then she skipped out of sight. During checkout, I mentioned the girl to the clerk, and she smiled and asked me to describe exactly what I saw. After hearing my story, she nodded and said I had seen the ghost. Apparently, a young girl had fallen into the creek, gotten trapped against a grate, and drowned.